I peered at the faint glow of my phone screen. The time stared back, unforgiving. 11:47 p.m., almost midnight. I let out a low groan. My fingers fumbled, trying to get a better grip on the device. Not that it mattered. The screen was dead. No signal, nothing but mirrored blackness. Great. I had really messed up this time. My name is James Johnson, and I'm a geology student, though anyone looking at me right now would probably call me something less flattering. An idiot, maybe. I had been out all day, focused on collecting rock samples for my thesis, so was looking for a very specific type of metamorphic rock, one that only appears in certain geological formations within Sequoia National Park. But I knew I was pressing my luck staying out so late, especially since I decided to take a shortcut through a dense part of the park near the trail leading to Morrow Rock. The plan was simple enough: cut through this less traveled area, shave off a few miles, and be back at my car before the real darkness set in. But I got so wrapped up in finding the perfect sample, digging around this one outcrop that looked promising, that I just lost track of time. The sun dipped below the horizon faster than I expected, and then the twilight faded into full-on night in what felt like minutes. Now, here I was, miles from where I needed to be, with only the beam from my headlamp cutting through the gloom. The moonlight was barely breaking through the thick canopy of the giant sequoia trees, leaving the trail mostly invisible. Each step felt like a gamble, my boots crunching on dry leaves and loose dirt. The air was getting colder, a sharp chill that made my exposed skin prickly. I pulled my thin jacket tighter around me, but it didn't do much. I kept telling myself I was fine. I had my headlamp, a full water bottle, and a backpack full of rocks that was suddenly feeling a lot heavier than they had a few hours ago. It was just a longer hike than planned. That's all, nothing to worry about. The familiar sounds of the forest usually calmed me down. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl. But tonight, those sounds felt different, muted almost, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My headlamp bobbed with each step, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the tree trunks. The sequoias here were colossal, ancient things that seemed to touch the sky. They stood so close together, their branches interlocked high above, that they created a sort of living tunnel around me. It was impressive, sure, but also incredibly disorienting in the dark. Every now and then, I'd stop, switch off my headlamp, and try to let my eyes adjust to the minimal moonlight, hoping to spot a landmark or a clearer section of the path. It never helped. The darkness was just too complete. I was somewhere along a particularly narrow part of the trail, where the trees grew even denser. When I saw it, it was just a flicker, a subtle movement that caught my eye even through the dim light of my headlamp. My gaze went up, instinctively, toward the very top of those impossibly tall trees. And there it was, a figure, too tall, way too thin, to be any animal I knew. It was impossibly thin, almost like a stick figure against the dark backdrop of the sky. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, like something drifting through the air, completely weightless. It wasn't climbing, it was almost gliding. It easily reached the highest branches, its form stretching higher and higher, a vertical line against the sliver of moon. It was a silhouette, really, a dark shape against a slightly less dark sky, but there was no mistaking its towering height. I stopped dead right there, my boots digging into the loose dirt, my breath hitched, a cold knot in my chest. I strained to see, to make sense of what I was looking at. My head tilted back so far I felt a pull in my neck. What was that? Was it a trick of the light? Some kind of weird branch formation? I hadn't noticed. It didn't make sense. Nothing that tall moved like that. Not through the treetops. Not so smoothly, so effortlessly. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. When I opened my eyes, it was gone, just like that. Within seconds, the figure vanished, blending into the dark foliage. as if it had never been there. The tops of the trees looked normal again, just the usual tangle of branches and needles. Had I imagined it? Had the exhaustion finally gotten to me? I tried to rationalize it. Really, I did. Maybe it was an optical illusion caused by my headlamp beam moving, or maybe it was just fatigue, making shapes out of shadows. I tried to tell myself that, but a growing sense of dread, cold and sharp, started to spread through me. It settled deep in my stomach, making it clench. My neck felt cold, and the hairs on the back of it seemed to stand straight up, a prickling sensation that ran down my arms. The forest, which had been alive with the barely audible sounds of crickets and the rustling of unseen leaves, became eerily silent. All those familiar noises just stopped. It was a complete silence, thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. Not a single cricket chirp, not one rustle. It was like I had stepped into a void. Every shadow around me seemed to stretch and deepen, reaching out like thin, clawed fingers. Every distant sound, no matter how small, suddenly felt closer, magnified by the quiet. The snap of a twig in the distance felt like it was right next to my ear. I could feel my own breathing, loud and ragged in the stillness. I fumbled again for my phone. Maybe if I just turned it off and on quick, it would grab a signal. A desperate hope. My fingers worked clumsily, almost dropping it. But no, still nothing. It was just a dead screen. A useless block of plastic and metal in my hand. I shoved it back into my pocket, the cold plastic feeling heavy and pointless. This was stupid. I had to keep moving. Standing here, alone in the dark, freaking myself out, wouldn't get me anywhere. I pushed down the rising panic, took a deep breath, and tried to convince myself to keep moving. I had to get out of here. The park exit wasn't that far. I told myself that, over and over, trying to make myself believe it. I forced my legs to start moving again, quickening my pace along the narrow path, pushing past the rising dread. Every step felt urgent now, a desperate desire to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever I thought I saw. I forced my legs to start moving again, quickening my pace along the narrow path, pushing past the rising dread. Every step felt urgent now, a desperate desire to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever I thought I saw. The prickling sensation on my skin hadn't gone away. If anything, it felt worse, like thousands of tiny needles poking me all over, reminding me that I wasn't alone out here. I kept glancing into the woods, my eyes darting from one dark patch to another, half expecting to see that impossibly tall figure again, just standing there, watching. It was a stupid thought. I knew it was, but I couldn't shake it. My headlamp beam bounced with my hurried steps, making the shadows dance, turning familiar branches into twisted, threatening shapes. Each colossal sequoia tree seemed to loom over me, their dark forms blending together into an oppressive wall of black. The air grew colder. It was a damp, biting chill that seeped right through my jacket, making my teeth want to chatter. I hugged myself, my arms wrapped tight across my chest, trying to hold on to some warmth. But the cold wasn't just outside, it felt like it was inside me too, a frozen pit in my stomach that just kept growing. Then I caught a smell. It was strange, odd, unlike anything I had ever smelled in the forest. Metallic, almost faint, really faint at first, but it was distinct. A sort of sharp, coppery scent that wafted through the trees on the barely there breeze. It made my nose wrinkle, and I wanted to cough, but I held it in, not wanting to make any more noise than I already was. I tried to focus on the trail, on putting one foot in front of the other, but my mind kept going back to that figure. How could it move like that? What was it? My scientific brain, the one that usually rationalized everything, had completely shut down. It had no answers for something that glided through treetops like smoke. My geology thesis, the rock samples in my pack, all of it felt so incredibly far away, so unimportant compared to the immediate, pressing need to just get out of this place. A twig snapped. It wasn't on the trail, not near me. It came from deeper within the thick underbrush, off to my right. It sounded heavy, like something with actual weight had stepped on it. I stopped dead, planting my feet, my headlamp beam wavering. I held my breath, listening, straining my ears past the loud thumping in my chest. Nothing, just the continued deafening silence of the forest. My throat felt dry, sandpaper rough, then another snap. Closer this time, definitely closer. It sounded like whatever it was moving parallel to me, keeping pace just out of sight within the dense trees. Each snap, each rustle of leaves that followed, felt deliberate, intentional, like it was letting me know it was there. My skin crawled, a deep, unsettling feeling that made me want to bolt. But where would I go? The trail was barely visible as it was, and the forest off-path was a tangled mess of roots and fallen branches in the dark. I spun around, shining my headlamp into the darkness, sweeping the beam wildly from side to side. My eyes darted from trunk to trunk, trying to pierce the gloom. Nothing, just the ancient trees, their dark barks blending into the night, their branches like bony fingers reaching for the sky. They were so dense, so tightly packed, that it was impossible to see more than a few feet in. I clicked my headlamp off for a second, then back on, thinking maybe the sudden shift would catch something. Anything. Still nothing. Just the flickering spots in my vision from the brief darkness. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. It felt like it was trying to beat its way out. I could almost hear it, loud and desperate. My mouth tasted like rust, and my hands were shaking, making the headlamp beam jump even more. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again, trying to regain some kind of calm. It didn't work. The panic was a cold claw, tightening its grip. A low gurgling sound then broke the silence. It came from somewhere ahead of me, deeper in the woods, off the path again. It was wet, almost liquid, like someone trying to talk while their throat was full of water. A horrible, unsettling noise that made my stomach churn. It was followed by a soft dragging noise, like something large being pulled over dead leaves. Asterisk, shush, shush. The sound got closer with each passing second, definitely drawing nearer. It was slow but steady, an irritating whisper in the overwhelming silence. I couldn't tell what it was, but it sounded heavy, like something dragging its weight, not footsteps. This was too much. All of it. The figure, the silence, the sounds, the smell. I couldn't rationalize it away anymore. I had to move, and I had to move now. I picked up my speed, practically jogging now, my boots crunching loudly on the dry leaves. My backpack bounced awkwardly with each hurried step, the rock samples inside clanking together, feeling even heavier than before. I didn't care. I just needed to put distance between me and those noises. My breathing became ragged, short, quick gasps for air. My legs burned, and my muscles protested, but I pushed them harder. The trail was a blur in my headlamp, a vague path I was trying to follow but kept losing in the dark. I almost ran into a tree at one point, swerving at the last second, my shoulder brushing against its rough bark. My foot caught on a loose root, one of the countless ones that crisscrossed the trail in the dark. I stumbled, my arms flailing, trying to catch myself, but there was nothing to grab onto. I went down hard, landing on my knees, a sharp, searing pain shooting through them as they scraped against the unforgiving ground. The headlamp beam bounced wildly as I fell, then settled on the dirt right in front of me. I let out a choked gasp, pushing myself up with my hands, my palms stinging. As I struggled to regain my footing, bracing myself against the ground, I heard it, a sound right behind me, so close I felt it. Heavy breathing, a wet, rattling gasp that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the wind, not some animal. It was too deep, too guttural, too large. It sounded like something huge was breathing right over my shoulder, the sound of air being pulled in and out, thick and labored. I scrambled up, not daring to look back, not even for a second. My knees burned, my hands throbbed, but I ignored it all. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to just get away. I sprinted blindly into the dark woods, abandoning the faint trail completely, pushing through the thick underbrush, hoping the dense trees would offer me some kind of escape, some kind of cover. Branches clawed at my face and arms,
sharp twigs tearing at my jacket and snagging on my pants. I pushed through them, not caring about the scrapes, the light burning pain. My headlamp bounced wildly, throwing erratic beams of light into the chaos of trees and bushes. It was a dizzying mess, a blur of green and brown, all blending together into an indistinguishable wall around me. The ground was uneven, a tangle of roots and hidden rocks, and I stumbled every few steps, catching myself just before going down again. My lungs were burning, each breath a painful gasp that tore at my throat. I could hear the dragging sound gaining on me. Asterisk, shish. It was louder now, closer than before, a relentless whisper that seemed to mock my desperate flight. It followed me through the dense growth, a constant reminder that whatever it wasn't having trouble keeping up. Mixed with it, I could hear that wet breathing, a thick rattling inhale and exhale that was too heavy, too deep, to be anything normal. It was right there, I could feel it, just out of sight, shadowing my every panicked movement. I knew I was completely off the path now, lost in the deepest part of Sequoia National Park. This was the less traveled Redwood Mountain Grove, an area where the trees grew even thicker, more ancient, their enormous trunks pressing in on all sides. There was no clear path here, just pure wilderness, and I was thrashing through it like a trapped animal. The sheer size of the trees around me, their dark forms blotting out what little moonlight there was, gave the whole place a suffocating feel. It was like running through a maze made of giants. My legs ached, my muscles screaming in protest, but I pushed them on, adrenaline coursing through me, a raw, primal fear propelling me forward. I had to get away. I had to put as much distance as possible between myself and that awful sound. My head swam, light and dizzy, from the exertion and the rising panic. Each step was a desperate gamble against the uneven ground, just trying not to fall again. The feeling on the back of my neck, that prickling sensation, was worse than ever, a constant reminder that I was being hunted. Suddenly, the trees thinned. I stumbled, almost falling forward, as I broke through a final dense line of bushes and into a small clearing. I stopped dead, my boots digging into the loose dirt, my chest heaving. The headlamp beam settled on the open space in front of me, a small circular area in the midst of the towering trees. The gurgling sound was deafening here, a wet, liquid noise that echoed in the enclosed space. It was coming from somewhere directly ahead of me, deeper in the clearing, partially hidden by a cluster of even thicker trees. And the smell, that metallic scent I had caught earlier, it was overwhelming now. It hit me like a physical blow, sickly sweet and thick in the air, making me gag. It was the smell of blood, undeniably. So much blood. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom beyond my headlamp beam. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Up ahead, partially obscured by more trees, I saw movement. It was the same impossibly tall figure. It was on the ground this time, hunched over something I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. It was just a dark shape, a silhouette against the slightly less dark backdrop of the scattered trees. My headlamp beam was too weak to fully penetrate the deep shadows where it was, but there was no mistaking the unnatural height, even hunched over like that. It looked utterly grotesque, its back strangely curved, its limbs long and thin, like something pulled and stretched beyond all normal limits. It was moving, a slow, deliberate shifting, like it was pulling something apart. Then, a sound cut through the heavy silence of the clearing, a chilling, high-pitched wail. It wasn't human. It was too raw, too shrill, filled with a pure, unadulterated terror that made my blood run ice cold. It echoed through the clearing, for what felt like an eternity, bouncing off the massive tree trunks, before being quickly, brutally cut short. A sudden, abrupt end that left a horrible in the air. That sound, it wasn't like anything I had ever heard. It was the sound of something utterly helpless, utterly terrified, meeting a horrific end. The metallic smell in the air suddenly made horrifying sense. This thing, this impossibly tall figure, it was doing something horrible. It was feeding. My mind raced, spinning, with a frantic, desperate energy. This wasn't some optical illusion. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't an animal. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just observing me. It wasn't just following. It was actively hunting. I had been its prey since it first appeared in the treetops, or maybe even before that. The silence, the increasing sounds, that smell, it had all been a deliberate, terrifying game. A sick, twisted game. I had to get out. My instincts screamed at me, overriding everything else. My gaze darted around the clearing, looking for any possible escape route, any way out of this nightmare. I turned to run in the opposite direction, back towards where I had entered the clearing, away from the hunched figure and the unspeakable horror it was enacting. My mind was a blur of frantic thoughts, desperate for any escape. My legs felt like lead, heavy and sluggish, but I forced them to move, to lift, to turn. The thought of getting away, of putting even an inch of distance between myself and that thing, was the only thing that mattered. But before I could even take that first desperate step, a sudden silence descended once more over the clearing. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a profound, absolute quiet, far more terrifying than the previous sounds had been. The gurgling stopped, the wet breathing stopped, even the ambient hum of the forest, which I hadn't even realized was present until it vanished, was gone. It pressed in, thick and heavy, suffocating. The air felt still, completely still, as if the entire forest held its breath, just like I was. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was no longer hunched over. It was standing, and it was looking at me. The unnerving silence settled over me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just the gurgling, or the wet breathing that had stopped. It was everything asterisk. The ambient hum of the forest, the distant rustle of leaves, even the tiny buzz of insects, all of it was gone. It pressed in on me, thick and absolute, a profound quiet that was far more terrifying than any sound had been. The air felt still, completely still, as if the entire forest held its breath, just like I was. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was no longer hunched over. It was standing, and I knew, it was looking at me. I stood there, frozen, my headlamp beam still aimed at the dark expanse where I had last seen the figure. My own breath hitched in my throat, sounding impossibly loud in the overwhelming quiet. The frantic thump in my chest felt like it was rattling my entire body, a desperate drumbeat against my ribs. I had to move, I had to move, I had to. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to just get out of this clearing, away from that thing. My gaze darted around, searching frantically for any direction that didn't lead towards the horror that lurked just beyond my sight. I spun around, not waiting, not thinking, just reacting. I pushed through the clearing, aiming for what I hoped was the general direction of the park road, miles away. It was a desperate, probably foolish gamble, but it was the only option I had. There was no trail here, just a confusing jumble of uneven ground, tangled roots, and dense patches of undergrowth. My legs felt heavy, like lead, but I forced them to move, lifting them high over unseen obstacles, my boots crunching on dry leaves and loose dirt. Each step was a frantic, clumsy lurch forward, my arms pumping wildly to keep my balance. The metallic smell in the air intensified with every hurried breath, sickly sweet and thick. It filled my nostrils, making my stomach clench, a horrible, cloying scent that tasted like rust on my tongue. It was so strong now, so undeniable, that it felt like I was breathing in pure horror. I tried to pull my shirt up over my nose and mouth, to filter it out somehow, but my hands were shaking too badly, and I didn't want to break my desperate run. My headlamp beam bounced erratically, making the shadows dance, turning every tree trunk and bush into a menacing figure. The clearing felt vast now, an open trap with nowhere to hide. I could feel the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that unsettling awareness that I was being watched, being followed, even without hearing a sound. It was like a cold hand pressed against my skin, a constant reminder of the presence behind me. I stumbled again, my foot catching on something hidden in the darkness. My arms flailed, and I pitched forward, losing my balance completely. This time, I hit the ground hard, my chest slamming against the dirt, forcing the air out of my lungs in a painful gasp. My headlamp flew off, rolling a few feet away, its beam now pointing uselessly at a patch of dense brush. I lay there for a second, winded, trying to suck in air, the metallic smell suddenly overwhelming in the immediate vicinity. vicinity. My hand, instinctively reaching out to steady myself from the fall, plunged into something wet and cold. It felt slick, thick, and utterly wrong. A wave of revulsion washed over me, and I recoiled instantly, pulling my hand back as if it had touched fire. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, pushing myself away from whatever I had touched, my brain screaming in protest against the sensation. I fumbled for my headlamp, my fingers shaking so badly, I almost dropped it again. When I finally got it on, and aimed its beam down, it shone on the ground right next to where I had fallen. It wasn't a rock, not a root, it was a partially consumed deer carcass. The sight hit me with a jolt that went straight through bone and muscle. It was a large buck, its body torn open, parts of its flesh ripped away. Its eyes were wide, glazed over, and frozen in a look of pure, unadulterated terror. They stared up at me, accusingly, endlessly, reflecting the beam of my headlamp like dark marbles. The gurgling sound I had heard, the dragging, the sickeningly sweet metallic smell, it all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity that made my stomach revolt. This wasn't some natural predator. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. Their kills didn't look like this. The sheer brutal force that had torn apart this animal, the way parts of it were just gone, it confirmed my worst fears, solidifying the nightmare into an undeniable reality. That thing, the impossibly tall figure, it was real, and it was predatory. More than that, it was asterisk feeding asterisk, and it hadn't just been a sound or a fleeting glimpse in the trees. It had been right here, in this clearing, doing this. I let out a choked sound, a mix of a gag and a sob, scrambling backward even faster, digging my heels into the loose dirt, pushing myself away from the horrific scene. My mind raced, utterly disoriented by the sheer depravity of what I was seeing. Fear, primal and overwhelming, seized me, tightening its icy grip around my chest. This wasn't just a threat, it was pure, unadulterated horror. As I backed away, my eyes still fixed on the mangled deer, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. It was a deep, resonant sound, not quite like any animal I had ever heard. It wasn't loud, not exactly, but it was asterisk felt, asterisk, a vibration that went straight through the soles of my boots, up through my legs, and into my very bones. It came from directly behind me, so close I could feel the slight shift in the air, the subtle movement of something massive. I didn't need to turn around, I didn't need to see it. I knew the figure was there. I could almost picture it, standing tall behind me, its impossibly long limbs, its grotesque shape. The air grew heavy, thick with its presence, pressing in, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. It was an oppressive weight, a chilling aura that radiated from it, making every hair on my body stand on end. I could almost smell it, a faint, acrid scent underlying the overwhelming metallic smell of the deer. Something ancient and wrong. My legs felt wobbly, my knees weak, but I forced myself to take one last desperate step away, to put any small amount of distance between myself and that awful presence. My foot snagged on something unseen, a root or a rock, but before I could catch myself, before I could even begin to fall, I felt a crushing force on my shoulder. It was impossibly strong, a grip that felt like a vice made of steel, tightening with a power that defied anything natural. It dug into my flesh, a burst of pain shooting through my shoulder, completely overwhelming all other sensations. And then, with a terrifying effortless ease, it turned me around. There was no struggle, no resistance. My body simply complied, twisting to face it, propelled by that monstrous strength.